Merci beaucoup, Yanis. Thank you very much. And thanks for making this so spontaneously possible after the surprise that SNCF played yesterday afternoon. It's for me, at least, a great pity to not be able to be with you and share this discussion live, and especially also share all the other presentations and be able to discuss with you on the results. And I'm also quite unhappy to have missed the keynote. Okay, let's get going. I'll see again how to share the screen. Sorry for this. Just 1 second.
It's almost there.
Okay, and there we go.
It's okay.
Can you see it?
Yes, it's fine.
So, I'll start out. Well, first of all, I'm going to talk about some reflections I had about another actually very simple way of classifying writing systems in open and closed writing systems. But before actually coming to these reflections, which are really largely an invitation also for discussion, I'll start my point actually with some aspects that were triggered by the review process itself and by some remarks on what writing actually is. I think you will see that this then ties in well later on with a discussion on open and closed writing systems. Just to check, do you see the whole slide? Because here on my side I see a cut down version of the slide. But for you, do you see the whole one? Well, let's assume. What is writing? Writing is certainly, to quote De Francis, visual speech, but I think it's quite a bit more than just visual speech. I mean, it is true that this is certainly its primary objective, to transmit words of a written language. But actually, if we look here at this extract from Ulysses, we see that in various ways it succeeds in encoding much more than just the text, the sheer words behind it. It plays its punctuation. If you look at the word well, you'd normally expect it to be well, comma, I can break them in this instance if I will. It's a conscious choice to encode additional information in the way this is used. The dash clearly means we have speech here. The italics, we have a quotation in this case, often foreign words, non-English words. And even down to tiny details as the space before the colon, which is very much the French way to encode punctuation, but absolutely not the English way. So what we see here is that in the way it's written, in addition to the pure speech part, a lot of the aspects of the communication, including estrangement from the English language, estrangement from the setting, is transmitted by the writing itself, making it actually beyond visual speech an example of visual communication. To come to a completely different example, I think it could hardly be more different. On a tweet tweeted a few days ago by, well, I assume a girl, but actually I don't know. For all I know, it could be anybody. But certainly somebody taking on the gendered role of a girl. And in this tweet, which is actually on a computer game that in turn is about a music anime, she clearly states, let's assume it's a she clearly states some facts on this particular image. She says why she likes it, but again, the way she uses writing, aspects of writing, enable her to encode many more things, actually many more things that you could easily express in spoken language in the first place. You would probably do so by gestures, by shrugging. And this way she not only transmits the enthusiasm, but if you look at the end, actually also her fear, if you see the crying emoji, to not be able to win this card, which is the goal in this computer game, but which is rather difficult to attain. So a lot of information that is transmitted in writing via the way it's used, that go beyond the speech part of it. And all of these are what I've called actually in the beginning of the book that Yannis kindly showed to you, secondary characteristics of writing systems. These are things that go beyond the speech aspect. The primary characteristic being, of course, the capability of the writing system to express speech. And these are things like the relative order, the use of glyph, the use of ligatures or the non-use of ligatures, the use of font sizes, use of font styles, the way you arrange the text, writing direction, choice of colors. And I think we will, even though it's not the main talk, see examples of this in the next minutes. But with this, I conclude my little excursion for start and come to the main topic, which is classifying writing systems. Writing systems traditionally are classified in essence by reference to spoken language, or the language they encode. Be that the verbal signs, syllabic signs, and alphabetic signs that Taylor, in his groundbreaking work in the late 19th century, used, or Gelb in the work that actually established the term grammatology, when he spoke of word syllabic, and alphabetic writing, or Daniels when he has 5 categories from logosyllabary to feature, and there are quite a few more. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with this. It is a perfectly valid way to look at writing systems and at classifying writing systems. I'm just proposing another classification that gives different views on this, and a classification that is purely based on the formal characteristics of the writing systems. This is not at all to replace the classification before, but to have a second classification that actually gives different insights. What is it? Well, first of all, any writing system is a set of signs, a finite set of signs. Any language that uses this writing system uses a subset of this set of signs. It can be the full, can be identical. In cases like the Latin script, it's typically a small subset. But either way, for languages like French, like German, like English, there is a very clear idea what type of signs belong into this subset. And the writing system that encounters this, in this case the Latin writing system, I call here a closed writing system. Whereas writing systems where there is no clear idea of how many signs they actually contain, I propose to call an open writing system. A closed writing system is characterized by a consensus on the number of signs in any for any language, a clear and agreed character repertoire, the fact that signs are very rarely added or removed, and almost as a corollary, that they normally have a clear internal order. The size can vary. It can be Phoenician, it can be Hebrew, it can be Arabic, it can be Greek, Latin, Cyrillic, but it can also be a huge repertoire like Hangul. And of course, these are a few examples. An open writing system is in its nature extensible, easily extensible. New signs can be added. Different people come up with different kinds of signs, often very significantly different order of signs. There are typically many signs where people disagree whether these are historic variants of existing signs or whether these are indeed separate signs. And normally, there is a mistake here. They don't have a clear internal order. Actually, they have often multiple internal orders. Though this is not a hard and fast rule. Examples here are the Egyptian hieroglyphs, cuneiform, the Chinese and Japanese writing systems, and quite a few more. So let's have a closer look at closed writing systems. The archetypical closed writing system is the writing system used in Western countries after the introduction of the printing press, after the printing press had fully established it. The concept often called the Gutenberg Galaxy, where the writing system is fully standardized and there are strong conventions with only limited variability. This is reinforced by the technology. Movable type, there are only so many movable types that you can pick from, and it's quite expensive to create additional ones. It has been then the model of the typewriter in the beginning of the 20th century, and actually just as much the model of the early character encoding standards. Characters outside this repertoire almost didn't exist, were at least very difficult to handle and needed quite specialized systems. Actually, I recall this very well in the late 90s, early 2000s. I was working on the two-step, in the team of the two-step system of tools, which had to go a long way to permit typesetting of non-Latin scripts, and anybody using Tech and LaTeX knows the same story. But let's come to, from the archetypical closed writing system to a semi-open writing system. And there we are moving back in time, not accidentally into the time of manuscript. One example are abbreviaturae, where the basic, in this case, Latin alphabet was expanded, was extended using conventional but relatively standardized abbreviaturae. There were many of them, also with great variability over time, but they were still reasonably standardized. If you look at this example from manuscript from the Vatican Library, you see examples like De Primis Moribus on the second line, or De Baptismo Divini, or De Mysterio Christi, where you really have to know the underlying Latin and the abbreviatura to make sense of the text as it's written here. It was at the same time closely linked to calligraphy and to the constraints of the medium, because vellum, on which this was written, was naturally expensive. So there was a big incentive to save time and space. That said, they were still considered equivalent to a string of several signs and could be replaced without significant change in the semantics. That's not necessarily the case for ligatures, which in the Unicode philosophy of things are just seen as equivalent again to strings, and in many ways they are, and in many writing systems they are, but they can also become signs and statements in themselves to transport aesthetic, religious, or political messages. It's not a coincidence that even to this day some Pakistani newspapers, and this actually is an example of yesterday, use essentially calligraphic traditions to produce even an everyday artifact as a newspaper. And the example I've picked from a real manuscript from the early 19th century is actually in no way extreme. It's even a very everyday type of text, a medical treaty. In addition, a translation from a French original, still handwritten. This type of use of ligatures is almost invariably a link to a vibrant manuscript tradition, which especially the Arabic writing system has maintained to this day as an art form, but also the truly open writing systems in China and Japan have fully maintained a very strong calligraphic tradition. But there is also the movement in the inverse, where in principle open writing systems, in this case I take the example of Japan, are restricted to a closed subset. One example are the Tojo kanji that were introduced in the mid-20th century and then extended somewhat to the Jojo kanji. Why? Again, partially very practical reasons, that printing in a Gutenberg Galaxy with a writing system that is completely open is very difficult due to the restrictions of type. It's at the very least very expensive, but also quite practically that it makes education and use in mass media much easier. Later, these were used in the first character sets, first multi-byte character sets, that even though they were hugely larger than the ones used, let's say, in Western Europe or in the US, were still closed. And this transformed partially the, in principle, open writing systems into semi-open writing systems, pushed, last but not least, by technology. But even then, it was always usual in this tradition, certainly in Japan, to mix scripts, be it hiragana, katakana, kanji, but also Latin script and Latin punctuation marks. And this moves to the last sector, to the present, how things are moving now. And we are now moving into the age of Unicode, which, and this is a big question mark, is in many ways more similar, I think, to the manuscript tradition than to the Gutenberg Galaxy, even though that might sound a bit like a heresy, and even a bit counterintuitive. Because what is Unicode first and foremost? It's a single standard and a single methodology to encode many, if not all, scripts for use on basically all devices, supported by now by basically all fonts, and a part often overlooked, supported by virtual keyboards on mobile devices that can shape up to basically any character use. And in fact, both Android and iOS support multiple keyboards, even two by default, the second one being a keyboard for emojis, which they also support during character coding. So there is reason to believe that Unicode actually is creating, maybe has created, a single worldwide monumental meta writing system, which is way beyond its original remit. It's not what it set out to do, but it is possibly what it has de facto achieved. And for doing so, let's have a look at, again, an example linked to music anime. In this case, one called Love Life with a band called Muse. And on this page, which is definitively not targeted as a scholarly audience, very much the opposite of a scholarly audience, you can see kanji, hiragana, katakana, Latin, mix of punctuation. But if you look closely, you will even see a Greek character, namely mu, which is the symbol of the name of this band. So all these characters from different writing systems are happily mixed up on this website for a general audience. In fact, if anything, for a young person's audience. And we see the same more and more in Western production as well. And I'm taking here 3 examples of tweets that all have in common that they are from official sources. So in contrast to the tweet I found at the beginning, which is clearly from a very non-official context, all of these are tweets coming from official sources. In this case, from the Erasmus Plus program, where you see a happy use of emojis like a camera to underline, to stress the use of the photo. It's actually just a repetition of what's already in the text. Clapping hands to show that this is obviously positive, so it gives a mood marker to interpret, and essentially a semantic marker to interpret that we should think the next 2 interrail passes are good, and a pointer to a URL symbolized by the pointing finger. Another one where the use is a bit more restrained But still, even here in a tweet in the Luxembourgish context, which is a relatively dry subject, though it's a very important one, you see the use of the Luxembourgish flag to stand in for the toponym Luxembourg, or Luxembourgian, the adjective, and a pointer towards a blog highlighted by this arrow. And the last example is from the US, from a US police department, where actually a good part of the semantics of this text is encoded in emojis. You see examples of the variables like mobile, watch, computer. You see the statement, don't forget about locking the car door, where actually the verb and the noun are encoded as emojis. Similar, the doors of the house. And then finally, a stress on the statement already said with the alarm. So we see here a mix of actually de facto logographic writing to use of emojis to stress existing message already expressed in normal written text. Which leads to a little idea of how emojis can actually be classified. And the type of uses we have seen here. They can act as mood markers to make it clear what the message is that is supposed to be transmitted, so they can disambiguate the interpretation. They can stress, in the way the pointing finger does, a message in the text. It can really play a role in a sort of pseudo-logographic writing by encoding shower or door. It can add a semantic marker to say, okay, this is a positive message, this is a message to celebrate. But in some extreme cases, it can even act as a rebus, like eyes to encode I, which is, of course, exactly the way proto-writing systems originally started to morph into real writing systems. Though, in fairness, this last case I've seen only in more experimental scenarios, not in real communication. Which leads to the last question, and then hopefully to the discussion. Emojis, I think, have the potential to fundamentally open up the closed writing system we are using in the West. It's actually linked in many ways to a renaissance of calligraphy in other contexts, where quite a few novels play with experimental typography, where the typography actually morphs into calligraphy and type, going beyond normal typography. There's also classical calligraphy in the West, which is getting more and more popular again. The big question is, for me at least, is this just a fashion that will disappear and in 5 years we'll just smile about it? Or is this a process we see in front of our eyes that the characteristics of our writing systems as we use it in Europe are about to fundamentally change? I think only time will tell, but I'm very interested in your feedback, and of course in any other type of questions. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. So we are a bit late, so we have time only for 2 questions. Please. Yes.
Well, thanks for the talk. My impression was, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that if we have a closed writing system, then it's a system in which the symbols of the system correspond to sounds, while in open or semi-open systems, it's always it has to do with semantics. So I think in order to have an open writing system, you have semantics in it. Is that right?
I think it's a bit of a simplification. So you definitely have a point. I agree that there is a tendency to this, but also in closed writing systems, the correspondence between letters, between signs and sounds is tenuous or can be tenuous. Of course, there are writing systems. There are alphabets that are relatively phonetic, but the English language is a prime example that the link between signs and sound can be tenuous. In turn, open writing systems do have phonetic aspects, but I agree they have a stronger semantic aspect to it.
Thank you for your talk. I would like to come back to your question on the last slide. I don't think so that emojis will open up closed writing systems. They can be added to a writing system, such as the Latin alphabet. But the phoneme-grapheme relation in the Latin alphabet won't be changed by this. Also in an alphabet we have logographic signs, special characters, like the currency signs, symbols, or for mathematic operations like plus and minus. And now we have emojis in this, let's say, character set, which can be added to a closed writing system. But in my point of view, it would be misleading to discuss whether the writing system itself will be changed by the use of emojis. They can be added, but they can't change the Latin alphabet system to an open one.
Well, adding is changing. I agree that most likely the core will not change, but I think there is a real possibility that it will expand exactly by addition of new signs and by seeing a mix of writing strategies, like we have seen the tweets. Okay, currently restrained mainly to social media and similar channels, so it's not the type of writing currently used in much of newspapers or any more serious writing. But I think it's perfectly open how this will develop. It can be that it will just disappear again, but it can be that this will start being integrated as a way of writing in more mainstream writing than just social media. If social media isn't actually right.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm afraid we have to stop questions now. So thank you, Marc.
Thank you. Yeah.